Support for this program is provided by the Foundation for Excellence in Louisiana Public Broadcasting and from viewers like you.
Good evening and welcome to Louisiana Public Square. I'm Beth Courtney, president of LPB. Joining us to explore the issue of capital punishment in Louisiana is one of our weekly news anchors, Natasha Williams. Welcome, Natasha.
Thank you. It's so good to be here. I appreciate the opportunity. Well, it's been 9 years since Louisiana has carried out the death penalty sentence, while the state's recently been unable to purchase the drugs it uses in lethal injections. A challenge to Louisiana's lethal injection protocol in 2014 put all executions on hold. That stay has extended again last year and will expire in July.
Well, Natasha, this session, two lawmakers, one a Democrat, the other Republican, will push to abolish Louisiana's death penalty. Opponents of capital punishment say it's expensive and morally wrong. Proponents say it's a deterrent and brings justice to crime victims and their families. Tonight, we hear from individuals on both sides of the debate over the penalty of death. On November 19th, 1995, Wayne and Carol Gazzardo's lives took a painful detour.
It's been miserable. I mean, me and my wife, we're not the same anymore.
That Sunday morning, their daughter, Stephanie, was killed while preparing a deposit for the restaurant she managed. Todd Wessinger, a former employee, followed the bartender inside and shot him. Todd then went looking for Stephanie, who, after hearing gunfire, had called 911.
And while she was on 911, she gave him the money. She'd already given him the money and was begging him not to kill her. Please don't kill me. And his exact words were, "You'll tell, shut up, bitch." And he shot her.
Wessinger shot and injured another employee, then attempted to shoot the cook in the head, but his gun misfired. He fled and went clothes shopping.
They caught him in Garland, Texas 9 days later. They brought him back to Baton Rouge, and then we started our ordeal.
Over the next 21 years, Wessinger appealed his conviction, but was rebuffed each time. His last denial was in 2018 by the U.S. Supreme Court in an 8-1 decision. Still, his death sentence, and that of all 66 inmates on Louisiana's death row, is in limbo. A hold was put on executions in 2014 in response to a lawsuit against the state's lethal injection process.
Several years ago, there was a case in another state where that protocol was used and an inmate it wasn't effective. And so groups came in, filed lawsuits there, filed here, and in many other states, basically alleging that it was cruel and unusual punishment.
Wilbur Stiles is Louisiana's Chief Deputy Attorney General. He says rather than postponing the lawsuit, which Louisiana has done 4 times, the state should fight it. He also proposes options to the current injection process and how to secure the needed drugs.
Several states have changed their protocol and moved to a different set of drugs. You know, we have a 3-drug protocol. Some of them have gone to a 2-drug protocol or 1-drug protocol. Most states have also gone through the process of making it the disclosure of that information, the supplier of the drugs and the supply chain of the drugs, making that a non-public record and confidential.
Major pharmaceutical companies will not sell certain drugs to Louisiana if they will be used in lethal injections. Proposed legislation this session will allow companies who provide the drugs to remain anonymous.
Going toward an avenue where we're secreting the identities, we're not subjecting these things to public record, I think we haven't gotten to a place where our system has enough integrity to do that.
Alana Odoms-Hebert is executive director of the ACLU of Louisiana. The group is opposed to the death penalty and cites the large number of Louisiana death sentences that are reversed or overturned.
Per capita, we have the 4th highest exoneration rate, and our rate of overturning sentences of conviction is about 85%. And we've had 11 exonerees in Louisiana over the last decade.
Hebert says the death sentence is also handed out disproportionately to blacks.
66% of the people on death row today are African American. And of the states around the country with more than 3 people on death row, Louisiana has the highest number of African American people on death row. We really believe that a system that continues to arbitrarily target African American people overwhelmingly to be executed is simply unconscionable.
The sanctity of life is an absolute, whether it's the unborn, the accidentally born, or the thoroughly guilty.
E. King Alexander is a self-described cradle Episcopalian and Republican. An attorney, Alexander is on the National Advisory Board of conservatives concerned about the death penalty. Among the group's issues with capital punishment,
it's not effective. It doesn't deter. It's vastly more expensive than life incarceration. And it takes a very, very long time. It's very unsatisfactory in all aspects.
Alexander says Louisiana has spent $110 million over the last 10 years on death penalty cases, the majority of that on the front end.
You really have to have a double trial for a death penalty trial. You have to have the guilt phase, and then if there's a conviction of a death-eligible offense, then you have the penalty phase. And it's got to the point that only 8 of our district attorneys out of 42 districts are, as a practical matter, using the death penalty anymore. The rest of them have thrown in the towel because of the expense.
This session, State Senator Dan Claitor, a Republican, is joining with Democrat Representative Terry Landry to sponsor legislation with the goal of abolishing the death penalty. Deputy Attorney General Stiles says the public has already spoken, and it's incumbent on the executive branch to carry out jurors' decisions. The number of exonerations, Stiles says, is proof the process works.
Everyone who gets sentenced to death has a full opportunity to have his case vetted by multiple courts, and when he gets to that final judgment and that case is over with, we could honestly say that that person has had one of the fairest, most due processes probably in all of the world.
The Gazzardos, both Catholics, say they would never want to see an innocent person executed.
The facts were there, the witnesses was there, the evidence was there, the ballistics was there. Everything proved him guilty. We want justice. There's never closure. This will never go away. We will take this to our graves with us.
Well, helping us explore capital punishment is our studio audience. It includes representatives from 3 advocacy groups opposed to the death penalty. We'll also have district attorneys, a current and former public defender, a family member whose daughter was murdered by someone who's still on death row, and an individual whose death sentence conviction was overturned. We also have a high school student with the Legislative Youth Advisory. Welcome, everyone. The issue of death penalty has been an ongoing topic in state and national studies. In 2018, the Pew Research Center conducted a national survey asking respondents if they favor or oppose the death penalty for persons convicted of murder. The survey found that 54% of Americans favor the sentence, while 39% are opposed to it. Broken down by gender, about 6 in 10 men, 61%, say they're in favor of the death penalty, and 34% are opposed. Women's views are more divided. 46% favor the death penalty, while 45% oppose it. Support for the death penalty varies significantly between races. While 59% of whites favor this type of punishment for those convicted of murder, 47% of Hispanics do, and just 36% of blacks support a sentence of death. While the Louisiana State University Public Policy Research Lab asked Louisiana residents the same question in 2018, 58% of respondents say they favor the death penalty for those convicted of murder. 34% responded that they oppose it. Support for the death penalty based on political party broke down as follows: 74% of Republicans, 61% of independents, and 42% of Democrats support the use of capital punishment for people convicted of murder. So let's start with our own survey. Tell me your perspective or experience. Do you favor or oppose Louisiana's death penalty, and why? Let's start with Rod. Tell me your feeling.
I'm not for it. I oppose.
Tell me why.
Because I was on death row. And I went at the age of 21 and I was falsely convicted.
What happened?
My son, he died of serious pneumonia, and I was charged with it, smothering, and I went to prison for it, and I was 21.
Okay. Now, we have different perspectives, obviously, on this side. Sir, tell me your feeling.
I'm for it 100%. I'd never want to see, like I said, I never want to see an innocent man be executed. But with the amount of appeals we went through, 23 years, all kind of objections and everything, for 23 years, he was found guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. Went all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court, voted 8-1. And I take it as an insult when someone says that it's too expensive to execute. They're putting a price tag on my daughter's life. I don't appreciate that.
Okay, thank you. Caitlin, what is your particular perspective?
I am very much opposed to the death penalty. I practice capital defense in Baton Rouge and across the state. I'm opposed to it both on a moral level as well as, the evidence that we have shows that Louisiana disproportionately targets people of color in capital charging and sentencing. It also shows that Louisiana has one of the highest rates of exonerations and one of the highest rates of death penalty convictions that are later overturned. There's no evidence that the death penalty is a deterrent, right? It does not. Louisiana consistently has one of the highest rates of homicide. So if it's not serving the purpose of deterring homicide or murder, if we can't say for sure that we trust the sentences that are handed down, it's my belief that the state of Louisiana, through the district attorney's office, has forfeited its right to make those decisions.
Okay. John, could you tell me how you feel about the situation?
Well, as you know, I prosecuted Derek Todd Lee and got the death penalty on him. He raped and murdered, depending on what you believe, between 9 and 12 very beautiful young women. I prosecuted and got the death penalty on Todd Wesker, who killed Mr. Gazzardo's daughter. And I prosecuted the first one executed after a 22-year delay in Louisiana between Furman and Gregg. A life sentence really doesn't exist in Louisiana because of the commutation power. I think these people that rape and murder little girls, little children, they drag them out, kidnap them in shopping centers, they take them out, they rape them, they kill them, and then they dispose of their bodies. I think they should die for doing that as punishment, whether it's a deterrent or not. School shooters, like over in Texas, goes in there and kills, 30-something students and then at McDonald's eating a hamburger. Come on, we're gonna send him to Angola and let him ride in the rodeo and watch color TV and have free medical care and free lawyers and family visits and 3 meals a day and supervised recreation? That's too good for them. These people that are trying to help these murderers get out of the death penalty, when the doors close late at night, these psychopathic murderers are laughing at them.
Okay, thank you. Melissa?
Wow, John. Okay. I think I was for the death penalty until one of my very closest friends was brutally murdered. And when Carl Servine was murdered in Shreveport in 1990, I think I desperately wanted Anthony Brown to get the death penalty. But through the process of being, and I feel Mr. Gazzardo's pain, and the legal process, and meeting with Sister Helen Prejean in 1994, it really occurred to me that the death penalty did not serve the function that we want. It did not give peace to the families. It would not have given peace to me. So I really have become an advocate for abolishing the death penalty based on that firsthand experience. And so I do believe that life in prison at Angola is certainly not the country club that Mr. Singfield describes, and that this is the right thing to do in Louisiana at this time for so many reasons. And so I just believe that we should have an appropriate conversation about justice, about redemption, but also about how the legal system can work, should work, and oftentimes doesn't work effectively.
Annie, could you tell me how you feel about the issue?
Yes, I am opposed to the death penalty because I believe that human life has intrinsic value and that no crime can take away that value, no matter how horrible it was. And I do believe that life in prison is an adequate punishment that can not only keep Louisiana citizens safe, but also avoid the risk of executing an innocent person, while avoiding the costs of legal fees that are often racked up by these prisoners on death row.
Okay. Danielle?
The Catholic Church has advocated for the abolishment of the death penalty for many years now. And that position is based on, as Annie said, there is an intrinsic value that each human being has that we cannot take away, regardless of crimes committed. And also, society can be protected now with modern means of detention. So we are able to protect citizens without enacting the death penalty, and therefore ought not to use the death penalty. And that doesn't mean that we turn a blind eye to justice, but that justice can be given without recourse to the death penalty.
Okay. Carol?
I don't agree at all when they talk about deterrent. Well, who knows what happened with my daughter after 25 years? Nobody knows. That's why it's not a deterrent. Some of these appeals should be cut in half. And I want justice for my daughter. That's what I want. And I don't care. Do you think when we were told that our daughter was killed, that we asked if he was purple or gray or black or green? No. He killed our daughter. We lost one of the most precious things in our life other than our son. So, do I have any sympathy for him? None at all.
Ms. Moran, do you care to respond?
So, I'm against the death penalty. I'm over here from the UK volunteering at the Capital Appeals Project in New Orleans, who worked on Rodriguez's case. So I think the very fact that we've got Rodriguez sitting with us today is kind of evidence that the legal system can get things wrong. He's sitting here as an innocent man who spent time on death row, and that's time that he can't get back, his family can't get back, and that's the kind of absolute risk of maintaining the death penalty in this state.
Nicholas?
In my opinion, the death penalty is really indefensible public policy for a lot of the reasons that have already been stated. Aside from the fact that Louisiana is near the top in death penalty exonerations, that should give everyone pause. The legal system cannot guarantee it will not execute an innocent person. And I mean, if that were to happen, I mean, that would be very much a travesty. And under the current system, there is a near 0% chance that that will not happen. My opinion is that if the legal system cannot guarantee that it will not execute an innocent person, then the death penalty cannot be a viable option.
Scott?
Well, I support capital punishment, and I support it because I believe in the intrinsic value of life too. And after sitting in this job for 22 and a half years, I've looked at families like the Gazzardos and the loss they've incurred, and at the hands of a shocking incident without justification. And our legislature has deemed that capital punishment is only available under certain circumstances. Not all intentional homicides are subject to the death penalty or can be exposed to the death penalty. So we protect our young, we protect our elderly, we protect our law enforcement. They are giving an extra layer of protection in the law, as it should be, I believe. So I believe in the intrinsic value of life too, but I believe in justice for victims, and I believe some acts rise to a level where the death penalty is appropriate.
Thank you very much. That's all the time we have for this portion of the show. When we return, we'll be joined by panelists, experts to examine the death penalty in Louisiana. Stay with us. Welcome back to Louisiana Public Square. Tonight we're looking at the death penalty issue in Louisiana. Joining us now is our panel. Richard Burke is director of the Louisiana Capital Assistance Center. His work includes representing indigent individuals charged with capital crimes during trial and on appeal. Burke is licensed in Louisiana, Texas, the federal court, as well as U.S. Supreme Court. Michelle Getty is a Deputy Solicitor General in the Office of Louisiana Attorney General Jeff Landry. Getty has been a professor of law for over 26 years, teaching at Southern University, Georgetown, and American University. Representative Terry Landry is a Democrat from New Iberia, a former head of the Louisiana State Police. Landry is sponsoring legislation this session that would abolish the death penalty. And Don Burkett is a district attorney for the 11th Judicial District in Sabine Parish. He has prosecuted over 100 jury trials, including several capital cases. Before we go to our audience questions, I'd first like to ask each of you very briefly in a sentence or two to please tell me your stance on capital punishment. Starting with Mr. Burke.
Well, I'm opposed to capital punishment. At the end of the day, I think it's wrong to kill people.
Well, speaking for the Attorney General's office, the first thing that we are concerned about are the victims of crime. Death penalty is the law in this state, and it's our job to enforce that law and to give some justice to the families of the victims of murder.
Representative Landry, you're sponsoring a bill to abolish, so please explain.
As a policymaker, I've evolved to this position. I'm a proponent. I was a proponent of the death penalty, spending 27 years in law enforcement and seeing the carnage of death and violent crimes. But having served in the legislature and seeing all the factual information, I'm really in trying to be a practicing Catholic and evolving to pro-life. I believe we have to protect life from the womb to the tomb.
Mr. Burkett?
I support the death penalty. It's not something I like, but I think it's something that's necessary. I think that there are people in our society who commit crimes that they should pay the ultimate price. And I think under our current system, more than ever, it's unlikely that anybody who is truly innocent would be executed. And on the other hand, there is no guarantee that people locked up for life will be there for life.
Let's take some questions from our audience now. Lauren, let's start with your question.
We've heard reasons why there are proponents and opponents, and I think Mr. Burkett said it best. It is the law, and it's our job to enforce the law. And I would just ask the opponents, are there any circumstances? Ideologically, I understand being opposed, but I've heard a lot of other reasons, you know, the procedure, the flaws. Are there any circumstances where the opponents would, any crime heinous enough where they think capital punishment might be the appropriate penalty in that case?
Mr. Landry?
Well, I think violence beget violence. I think death is so finite and so permanent that taking a life is not, it's a form of violence, whether it's the government executing or the violence on the street. If we are really going to practice life and the sanctity of life, I would have to say that we have to protect it. There are some people I believe that should not be among us in society, and I think that they should be put in a proper place. But as I inquire about those individuals that commit some of these crimes that are heinous, many of them are mentally disturbed, have mental problems. So I mean, and there are some fallacies and there are some mistakes. I don't accuse any prosecutor. I work with prosecutors and I respect what they do. They have a tough job. And they have to look at the victims in the eyes and explain to them. But there are mistakes that are made. Overzealous police officers, pressures from the community on heinous crimes, overzealous prosecutors. There are mistakes that's made. How do you go back and tell a person that's been executed, his family, we made a mistake? We live in an imperfect world. And if collateral damage is well enough, or you accept it, that we can execute an innocent man just for the sake of having a death penalty, well, we're all going to meet our maker one day, and we're going to have to give a test to that.
Mr. Burke?
I think that Lauren, as you point out, there's reasons that are policymaker reasons. Is it a good criminological or penological policy to have the death penalty? And then there are personal reasons. It's very easy to say of Louisiana's death penalty that the way it works, the way it's structured, it's bad policy, it's not working well, it's not working the way proponents would like it or opponents would like it. We shouldn't have the death penalty that Louisiana has now. But if you've asked me a personal question, for me, I think it's wrong to kill people.
Mr. Alexander, you have a question for the panel.
My question was for the proponents. What is it about the death penalty that you feel outweighs the cost and the error? And is that fiscal conservatism?
I can take that first, I guess. I don't know about fiscal conservatism. I mean, I think as the family of a daughter that was murdered, the families, the people that are at a loss are not worried about the fiscal part of it. But I think overall, just in general, just to many of the questions that are asked, because I've had to study it, and Representative Landry knows, he'll see me down at the legislature on his bill, I'm sure. I've looked into all these facts that get thrown around, and what I find is in these debates that take place, and even in testimony before the legislature, facts are thrown out that are not accurate, probably by both sides. But when you dig into them, we're talking about generally small numbers. So even in the fiscal part, you know, it has not been proven to me, I think you might have mentioned earlier, that the costs are on the front end. And I think our prosecutors here might take issue with the way that that's characterized, because they have a staff of prosecutors. I think they're going to prosecute cases, whether they're prosecuting a death penalty or a life sentence or something else. They're there, they're on a salary, they're in the office. The cost to the prosecution itself, the judge is there, the judge is going to be on the bench. I mean, all of those costs that are put into the numbers, the fiscal numbers, are there anyway, no matter what crime is being tried. So you have to really take those costs out that are going to be there day to day anyway when you go to look at the costs of the death penalty. Now, what you do have that you can look at is the cost of the defense that the states now have to pay for, and how long that takes. I don't think that the uploaded upfront costs are what's expensive about the death penalty. I think it's the 17, 18 years of appeals and post-conviction and habeas corpus through the federal courts. That's the cost of the death penalty. And there's an irony in that the anti-death penalty people are building the costs up and then complaining because it costs too much. So I know, but it's the truth. It's the truth. You can't get around that. It's 17 years of appeals, possibly 17 years of appeals that, as maybe Mr. Gazzardo or someone over here said, makes the death penalty ineffective as a deterrent, for example. And we can talk about the deterrent. I believe it is a deterrent, and I believe you can look at a number of things that show that. The studies, the most recent study, says that the facts, what's been done in the studies as to it being a deterrence or not, are just no good on either side. And so that it's really difficult to prove whether it is or whether it isn't a deterrent. But what you can look at, you've had 7 states that have abolished the death penalty since 2007. And if you look at those 7 states, a lot of them are very tiny states. Again, numbers are hard. At least in Maryland, for example, and New Mexico, the rate of murder skyrocketed right after they abolished the death penalty. Now, there have only been 2 or 3 years since those states have abolished it. But that's true. I can show you the statistics from the Death Penalty Information Center, for example, that show that. So I would argue, I mean, and that was part of the arguments for whether it works or not, was after it was abolished, did murders go up? Homicide went way up after the death penalty was put aside for a while by the U.S. Supreme Court. So you could argue that way. I'm sorry. I was just going to say more than that personally. I think that it brings justice to the families. It brings closure to some families, maybe not to others. I'm also the family of a murdered victim, and the person who killed the victims in my case was executed a little over a year ago. And I can tell you for myself and my daughter, it has brought great closure to us.
Okay. Let's, Franz, you have a comment?
Yes. What I struggle with as a former public defender that did capital work and as a former prosecutor that prosecuted heinous crimes is a justice system that we can all agree doesn't get it right all the time. And we know historically that we don't get it right all the time, which leads me with the issue of how do we reconcile the use of death penalty with the fact that we're probably going to get it wrong again. And, you know, when we talk about closure and we talk about costs, I'm very much concerned about putting someone to death that is factually innocent. And even if it's a small number, that's a big number. So to the panelists, I pose the question about how do we reconcile that?
I can't sit here and tell you that absolutely no one in America has ever been executed that could have been innocent. I will say this. The number is always brought up 11 exonerations in Louisiana, and then they talk about over half of the convictions have been reversed. Some of those exonerations might have been, or certainly were, probably factually innocent. Others, as you know as an attorney prosecuting and defending them, that there are other reasons other than factual innocence involved. One of the things that bothers me, though, do you realize that since 2017 that 53 people convicted of first degree in the state of Louisiana have had their sentences commuted by the pardon board? Did you know that? 53. And as a prosecutor, I know there are times when I took a plea to first or second degree carries a life sentence also. I took the death penalty off the table and I took that plea and I told the family that that person who killed their loved one would be there forever. I can't tell them that anymore because I don't know. Last year also there was a bill filed in the legislature to make parole eligibility for anyone after 30 years. And that's a nationwide movement. There are people I have prosecuted that to me the thought that they would ever walk free terrifies me. The next person up for execution in Louisiana supposedly would be Sepulveda. I convicted him back in the early 90s of scalding to death a 6-year-old little boy. Beat him over the head with a screwdriver, ran a tub full of scalding hot water and placed him in there after he'd basically tortured the child for 3 days. But yet, we can't execute Chris because we can't find a humane way to do it. That's why his execution hadn't been carried out. Do you think Chris Sepulveda should ever walk free again? Do you think he should have parole eligibility? The people who are pushing to do away with the death penalty, are you willing to also go and tell legislators like Mr. Landry, we would go along with this, but we want to take away clemency with the Pardon and Parole Board and the governor? We want no way to do it, but we'd like to guarantee that a bill will never be passed to give parole to people like that? I mean, what do you think? I have another person, Gary Barbaro, who I got a notice recently from the Pardon and Parole Board, and they're going to grant him a hearing. He took a mentally handicapped young man, about 19 years old, who bust tables, acted like he was buddies with him, he and another guy. And they take him from a Shreveport residence down into DeSoto Parish, where I was DA at the time, beat him over the head with a gun, hold his head with their foot on his head in a pond and drowned him. But yet, and I'm not saying it'll be granted, but apparently he's going to have a pardon hearing sometime in the next few months.
But Don,
I can't tolerate those kind of people being on the streets again. But maybe I'm wrong, Richard, but I find so many of the people that say they're opposed to the death penalty. If we did away with it tonight, then next week you would be at the legislature saying, well, you know, really, life's too long too. We really, now we've got rid of the death penalty, now let's get rid of life. And if we cut it back to, okay, you can have parole eligibility after 30, in a year or two you'd be back saying, well, you know, 30 is really too long, let's cut it back to 20. I mean, where does this end?
But where does it start? I mean, you're talking about taking a human life, killing someone as insurance against the possibility that a life sentence will be commuted. We shouldn't be killing people because we think the law might change. You get to be heard to argue that that person shouldn't get parole. You get to vote for the governor. You get to put people on the Board of Pardons and Paroles. That's how our system works. We don't kill them all to stop some other part of our legal system working the way that it is intended to work. If you don't like that, You go to the legislature, you go to the court, you go to the parole board. The Louisiana Board of Pardons and Paroles is no soft touch. It's guaranteed to have a victim representative on it. This idea, I don't want people to misunderstand that anyone convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to death got clemency. That's not true at all. And you're talking about a small number of people out of the thousands and thousands of increasingly aging prisoners our state has sentenced to life. I just don't think it's morally conscionable to say we're going to kill all of these people in order to ensure that one day a life without parole system won't change through the democratic legislative process. That's not
we don't kill all these people.
Exactly.
We've killed one person in 15 years. You say, is it a deterrent? Well, who knows? It's certainly not in Louisiana because nobody really thinks they're going to be executed. One person in 15 years? And we're killing all these people?
No, but
where are you
asking,
coming from with that?
Because you're asking the sentiment from yourself and Michelle and from Mr. Sinkfeld, for instance, is that we need to kill more of these people. As the former capital prosecutor of Caddo, Dale Cox, said, we need to kill more people. That is a position that I think people are allowed to have. I don't have a problem with people having a different view to me, but I do have a problem with scare tactics like these people are going to get out, they're going to get out tomorrow, they're all getting clemency, they're watching TV, they're riding in rodeos. I think we have to have a serious fact-based debate, and I think we have to acknowledge that there is a very significant moral component to this. And I say that, I have no doubt that the Gazzados disagree with my perspective and feel strongly that I am wrong.
Yeah, and
I just want to make clear that
let me ask
I
you a
don't
question.
say
he's
that out of
talking to me.
disrespect.
Let me
He's
ask you
talking
a
to me,
question.
and let me ask you a question. I've been prosecuting Louisiana 44 years. How many people do you think I gave life sentences walking around Baton Rouge right now? I had one call me back to the courtroom a couple of years ago to say hello. Last time I saw him, he's being sentenced to life in prison.
So is that why we have the death
life
penalty?
in prison does not exist in Louisiana. It was once a 10-6 rule before you got here. All of them would get commuted to 30 years, and then after they did 10.6, they got out. So people got tired of it and said, we don't want that anymore. The victims almost had a revolution in this state. They got tired of seeing their kids and their wives and their husbands murdered, and these people doing 10.6 years and then walking around the streets of Baton Rouge, where I prosecuted for 28 years. And I prosecuted in New Orleans, too. The first death penalty I tried was in New Orleans from a murder on St. Charles Avenue.
But John, if we want life to mean life, let's make life mean life.
How?
That doesn't mean
you have governors that come in
avoid
there, lame duck governors in the last 2 weeks, like up in Illinois, just commute every murder on death row.
2 weeks ago, they released a double murderer. Nobody knows. The governor doesn't take the blame. The DOC doesn't take the blame. The parole board doesn't take the blame. The warden doesn't take the blame. Double murderer.
Here in Louisiana,
In Louisiana,
without notifying
last week.
the victim's
so don't tell
family
me
that the hearing was
about
even being
you
held
don't
to
like
give them a
anybody
voice.
dying. You've never been where we were. Never have been, never will be. I hope you're not.
I appreciate it.
Rodriguez, you sat on death
you
row.
don't know what you're talking about.
Let's talk about what it was like to know that you didn't commit a crime and that your life could be taken.
That was my first time ever going to prison. It was hell. I'm still traumatized. It ain't no cakewalk. I was on 8th on death row in Angola. It's 100 and some degrees plus. When you just laying on the bed, you can't breathe. Everybody losing their mind. I was at 21, so it ain't no cakewalk. And I had a prosecutor just because of the color of my skin, you know. So it ain't no cakewalk. I could have been dead. I could have still been on death row. Who gonna tell my daughter, my mama, you know? So it's crazy we sitting there talking about death and killing somebody, you know? It's way bigger than it. Them people gonna live and they living it every day, that crime. Every day they living it. You killing them, you doing them justice. They living this every day. You kill them, you doing them justice.
That's what we asking for is justice.
But everybody got to die. You gotta die.
Oh, I'm ready.
All right, I'm saying, so what is the justice? What's the justice in it?
What is your question for Representative Landry?
What can we do to stop another innocent man like me from going to get the death penalty?
Well, that's the intent of the legislation that I filed. And look, this is a very, very emotional issue. I mean, it's very emotional.
Like we talk about,
And-
like I was a victim. What the DA that did this to me? We ain't talking to him. I was a victim. They planted stuff. He had all my stuff. Where he at?
You sitting there living. My daughter's dead as a wedge.
But I didn't. I understand that, sir. I can't take that back.
I understand that. and
I'm
I
just
feel
saying,
for
like,
you.
where's the
feel
DA?
for
I'm
you,
saying,
son.
where's these
I
people
really
in these
do.
high seats?
But you
He's
weren't.
the DA for the state. Where is he? He resigned after I came home. They lied. The doctor lied. He resigned when I came home. So where's the justice for me? They sent me back out to the world. I've been 5 years in prison when I was 21. Never been to prison.
And I am
get
so sorry.
gone back home. How can I cope with that? I got a daughter that's 11-year-old. I came up see her like that when I came home. She didn't know me.
But
So
you're living.
I lost
son.
all that.
You're living.
Because the color of my skin. I'm living, but I'm going through it.
Again, there are some people, I believe, that doesn't deserve to walk here with us, should be locked up. But we can handle that legislatively also. And we have had some improvements and some gains in this criminal justice reform. We had a very diverse group. I know there are people that don't agree with the criminal justice reform, but we cannot continue doing the same thing we've been doing for the past 30 years and getting the same results. I live in a community that feels gun violence, death every single day. Every weekend in the community I live in, somebody's killing somebody. But it's black on black crime. And there ain't no death penalty for killing a black. There is none.
Not true. That's
Well,
not
yeah,
true.
well, let me tell you
See,
right
that's
now.
what I'm talking about. You wanted to have a factual
Well,
argument, and that's simply not true.
Well, you show me where the numbers are. You show me where the numbers
Mr.
are.
Landry, I got a person on death row. The name of Taylor in DeSoto Parish, from DeSoto. He's white. He executed, him and his partner executed an African-American gentleman who had taken a second job selling cars to try to send his eldest daughter to college. Criminals don't come in colors to me. In fact, the three people, and I'm not DA in DeSoto, they split the two parishes in two districts, but the three people left on death row when I ended my tenure as DA, they're all white.
Let's talk about
that.
Let's talk about
That may be right, but let me say that Louisiana's death row has twice as many African American prisoners on it as make up the population of our state. It is double the rate. There isn't the slightest question that in terms of murder rate of prosecutions for the death penalty, people who will be offered pleas or not, and people who juries will give a death penalty to, that there is a huge increase in the imposition of the death penalty on African American defendants, and especially black defendants charged with killing a white person. Doesn't mean it never happens, Don. I understand that. I know exactly who's on death row. But we can't escape the fact that in Louisiana, we have this taint of race. And whether you agree entirely with that perspective on those figures, the fact is that we can't ask our community, we can't ask Rodriguez Crawford and his family to have confidence in our system of government and our death penalty when this taint of racism rests over it.
You just said something. You just said the black person who killed a white person. There's not a black person on death row that killed a white person. There's not.
That's just not true.
That's absolutely true. On death row right now, there is not a black person who killed a white victim. There are black persons who killed black victims, there are white persons that killed white victims, and there are white persons that killed black.
Why don't you ask Mr. Gazzardo about his daughter?
No, that's not
Well, I guess
I don't
that would
think
be
that's
true.
factual.
That would be
That's
true.
not true.
You know, and I
But-
want to say something about the race issue. I was 26 years old when I helped try my first capital case. I have never heard a discussion, a decision made to either prosecute or not prosecute the death penalty made on the basis of the race of either the defendant or the victim. The victim does not get to choose the race of the person that murders them.
Exactly.
And I think somewhere I would have heard it, because I've been in a lot of discussions. I've been in appellate courts all the way through all the courts of America. Somewhere along the line, somebody would have slipped up and I'd heard it. I would never make a decision like that, and I don't believe anybody should make a decision like that. But we can't control, we don't have a quota system or anything. We can't control who's doing the murders or the race of the victim in these cases. We take them as they are and we prosecute them. And you said I believed in killing more people. That's not true. I've been preaching that the death penalty should be reserved for very special cases where there's absolute proof of guilt in complete due process, with now high standards for criminal defense attorneys, that we should do everything within human possibility to make sure, and I don't think under that system any innocent person can ever be given the death penalty. It comes under multiple layers of courts for years, decades. It's not going to happen.
According to a most recent study, 2016, out of Southern University's Law Center, their journal, there was a longitudinal study from, I believe, 1975 to 2015 of death penalty convictions in Louisiana. Regarding race, a black man had a far greater chance, I don't want to cite the numbers, I don't have the study in front of me, of receiving the death penalty if he killed a white woman than if he killed a white man, a black man, or a black woman. And for white men, the rate of death penalty convictions based on their victim was fairly static. And what I mean by a higher chance, I want to say it was maybe 23% greater chance than if a black male killed a black woman. So the application of the death penalty it's either arbitrary to a very strange extent of sentencing that you can sort of correlate based on what color you are and what color the victim and what gender they were, or the application of it has been racist. And according to that article, for the last white person executed in the state of Louisiana for a crime against a black person was in 1752, when a French soldier attacked 2 black women with a bayonet. Now that predates the French and Indian War, so it has gone that long. So we do have a clear racial legacy.
Again, I don't say people purposely go out and have biases and present to the prosecutors, but I've been in law enforcement a little bit, and I've heard some pretty heinous things. I've heard some murders, especially when it's black on black, misdemeanor murder. It's a misdemeanor homicide. I've heard that.
I don't think that's happened in a long time, but I can
Well,
tell you, it hasn't happened in East Baton Rouge Parish for a long time, because here, I want to tell you something. Under 17 years of Doug Moore, we had 33 counts of death penalties. When you go to the majority of those, and I don't have the exact number, probably the majority of them were prosecuted by African-American prosecutors in front of African-American judges who you would think would be sensitive to this issue. And we had death penalty after death penalty. 1 5-count death penalty returned with an African-American prosecutor in front of an African-American judge. So we have great diversity now, and I don't think that's happening.
Baton Rouge has the same error rate as the rest of Louisiana. 85% of those death penalties have been reversed, and every single prisoner on death row out of Baton Rouge now is African American.
They weren't reversed. Some of them were pled because of what was considered incompetent or actions on the defense attorneys, not actions of the prosecutors or whatever. And I think that's changed a lot, because now they have extremely, as you know, high standards for defense attorneys, and you have new cases like Atkins and all that, and other cases that protect people that weren't there. What I'm saying, under modern standard, we have a modern death penalty that allows the DA not to even seek the death penalty if he wants to do a first-degree murder, and we're reserving it for these very horrible people that do things like shoot children or rape children.
Melissa, you have something?
Well, I appreciate the comments. One of my questions is about prosecutorial misconduct, because several death penalty have been overturned. Mr. Burke, how many have been overturned because of prosecutorial misconduct?
Well, we've had 85% of the death sentences since '76 that have been fully adjudicated by the courts have been reversed, overturned, or there's been a concession of error by the prosecution that's resulted in the death penalty being removed. Of those, the 2 biggest causes are prosecutorial misconduct, which can take the form of hiding evidence that would have proved someone was innocent, of relying on race to exclude jurors of color from the process, for instance, of making improper legal arguments, those sorts of things. But also, as John pointed out, the defense side has a significant number of those wrongful convictions and wrongful death sentences on death row as well. So there is a significant problem with prosecutorial misconduct, but also with the defense side is not able to do its job. And it's one of the reasons I'm so glad that Rodriguez is with us today, because people will say, oh, those exonerations are from the bad old days when prosecutors were misbehaving or defense lawyers weren't well trained. Rodriguez was convicted of a crime he didn't commit and sentenced to death only a few years ago under the modern system. There are just some things human beings shouldn't be messing with. We're not good enough for it.
Mr. Burkett, let's talk about the cost. Do you think the cost is precluding moving toward the death penalty for prosecutors?
It's no question that a burglary case costs more than a misdemeanor. A murder case in general costs more than some other felony, and certainly a capital case can be the most expensive. But I don't know how you put a price tag on justice. I mean, I know the people where I live, they expect me to do my job. They expect there to be justice. We had a case about 3 years ago. We had a police officer who kidnapped and murdered a man from Sabine Parish. And because it was such a high-profile case, and we tried it as a capital case, we had to go to Abolished to pick a jury. We spent 10 days living in a motel. Yes, it was expensive. Yes, it cost a lot of money. Then we took the jury back to Sabine Parish, and we tried him. And we got a first degree. And during the process of the sentencing hearing, after consultation with the victim's family, we decided, we allowed him to plead to first degree life with an agreement that they would not appeal. And I hope that he spends the rest of his life in prison, but I can't guarantee that anymore because I don't know what's going to happen. But when you talk about costs, justice is expensive, period. I mean, it costs money to summons jurors, it costs money to pay people. Nearly every felony in our system is defended by public defenders, so the public's paying a prosecutor to prosecute. They're paying a public defender to defend. As John said, all the things today, the DNA, and that's just a small part, but all the safeguards, it costs more money. But you can't put a price tag on justice. And when I say justice, I mean justice for a victim, for a victim's family, or in the case, Mr. Crawford, justice for somebody wrongly accused. So money is important in a rural district. When you start talking the big bucks up front to try a capital case, yes, it can be expensive, and yes, sometimes it may even be prohibitive. The criminal justice system it takes money to operate it, but you can't look at it as a cost-effective like you're running a business, or even the legislature.
And Don, can I say, I've never had a district attorney say to me, we're not seeking the death penalty because it costs too much, and I've never gone to a district attorney and said, don't seek the death penalty in this case because it'll cost too much. But let me tell you, if we're going to have a system that has the sort of guarantees where we avoid the wrongful convictions and wrongful death sentences, then we need to make a commitment to pay for it. As we sit here right now, there are 16 people in Louisiana charged with death penalty offenses who don't have lawyers appointed to them because the public defender system is broke.
Mr. Burke, let's close. Of course, I know we could talk for a very long time, and I'd like to talk more, but we're running out of time. Closing arguments quickly.
I think that this is a topic upon which people can disagree and have very strong personal feelings one way or the other, based in particular on their personal experiences. And I would never disrespect someone for having a different view than me on this. But I've seen the death penalty system in this state from charge all the way through to the end. And I don't believe that people who say they believe in the death penalty believe in the death penalty we've got in Louisiana. It is a broken system, and we should not be committing ourselves to it. And at the end of the day, again, for me, I just think it's wrong to kill people.
Ms. Getty, briefly.
I would say that all of us here, whatever side we're on, at least the lawyers that I see in this room, have been working for 30 years, 20 years, I don't know how long, to better the system, the whole criminal justice system. I served on the Criminal Justice Reinvestment Task Force. I served on the Indigent Defense Board. So I've been in it, I can say, for 30 years, and we have improved the system. As Mr. Sinkfield said, each year we have improved the system. Is it perfect? There will never be. To my knowledge, there's no perfect system of any kind anywhere, or a perfect human being of any kind anywhere. There will always be a mistake made somewhere, and we're always having to balance the benefits and risks of everything that we talk about. But for me, the death penalty gives a sense of justice to the community. It's not just about the family of the victim, although that's obviously key. It's about the whole community and the ability to give a sense to an entire community. That's why we have jury trials in the community. The sense of
Representative
justice
Landry,
for the
we need to
community.
have a closing comment.
Yeah, again, I come to this debate straightforward that I've evolved. I believe death is, any violent death is wrong, and I think we should be protecting life. Today we voted on a pro-life bill. There were 70 co-authors. I've evolved there, but I also evolved in terms of the death penalty. Justice is not the best, it's not the fairest for those people who believe that they've been wrongfully convicted. I respect everyone's opinion. I respect the district attorneys and the position they're taking. And most of them will come to you one-on-one and says, look, I don't really believe in a death penalty, but it's in my toolbox and I'm gonna use it.
Mr. Burkett?
I respect each and every one of these other panelists and their position, the people in the audience. You know, I took office as a very young 32-year-old district attorney 35 years ago, and I hoped I never faced the issue. I had a death case penalty pending when I took office in 1985. And the first 14 years of my career, that case defined my office to a large extent until he was finally executed. But there are people in this world that are inherently evil, evil all the way to the bone. And we have an imperfect system, as you said. Maybe criminal justice will never be perfect, but we have improved it greatly. But we never know when one of these monsters is going to be freed on society. And to me, it's something that we just cannot abolish and do away with.
Well, we've run out of time for our question and answer segment. We'd like to thank our panelists, Mr. Burke, Ms. Getty, Representative Landry, and Mr. Burkett for their insight on this month's topic. When we come back, we'll have a few closing comments. Well, that's all the time we have for this edition of Louisiana Public Square. We encourage you to visit our website at the address you see on your screen. You can view additional sound bites and join the conversation about tonight's show. We'd love to hear from you. Well, hurricane season begins in less than 2 months. Climate experts say the strengthening storms will continue to erode Louisiana's coastline. In addition, rising sea levels will eventually impact more than 2 million of the state's residents. Please join us in May for Louisiana Public Square as we explore sinking Louisiana. Thanks for watching, and good night.
For a copy of this program, call 1-800-973-7246 or go online to www.lpb.org.